What is going on, boys, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I kind of just want to get straight into it because I want to drive this freaking car. I drove it in the last video and clearly we beat on her a little bit too hard because now we're working on it again. Luckily, the part that broke, I have a spare one. I'm 99% sure we grenaded the power steering pump in this thing. The pump isn't whining or anything, it's still okay, but our fluid is super low now and there's power steering fluid literally everywhere. If I could show you guys down there behind the purge valve, there's just a pool of power steering fluid on the top of the engine block. And it's actually not a bad thing that we have to replace this power steering pump because the bracket on the back of the pump, which you guys can see right in there, kind of dark, but that bracket down there is broken, so I have a massive washer on it. And that bracket is just for the adjustment bolt for the alternator to set the tension on your drive belt. The other thing we got to do is swap out the stock intake, but we'll get to that once we get this power steering pump swapped in there, get the power steering system completely bled, and make sure that's all good to go and not pissing power steering fluid everywhere anymore. But yeah, if you guys want to see me slide this thing around and beat the shit out of it on its very first drive, click the link on the top of the screen. I'm not sure which side it's going to be on. So now let's get this power steering pump pulled out. Hopefully we don't make a mess absolutely everywhere. Even though underneath the car, it's already pissing power steering fluid everywhere.
Actually, holy shit. I'm gonna have to wash the whole underside of this car. It is dripping from everywhere. It's all over the oil pan. It's all over the subframe. Let's hope this is a power steering pump. I'm gonna jack the front end up first and see if something else is leaking. I just backed the car up a little bit just so I can see what all of these stains are on the shop floor. And that is some type of oil. I think that's power steering fluid, or ATF, because that's what these things take for power steering fluid. So let's get her jacked up. If it's power steering fluid all over the bottom, I'm gonna get that power steering pump swapped out, and then we gotta jack the car back up, and I'm probably gonna pressure wash the whole underside of this car and pressure wash the engine bay because there is power steering fluid everywhere. Okay, I had to stop the time lapse real fast because it is definitely the power steering pump, and I gotta show you guys under the car because this is bad. You can see the alternator's caked in power steering fluid, the belt is caked in power steering fluid, the whole timing cover is covered in it all the way to this side, and that's because that pulley is spinning around and it's just throwing it everywhere. I'm actually surprised it's not on the hood of the car too, because this is actually insane. So the oil filter's got power steering fluid all over it, oil pan has power steering fluid all over it. It's so hard to get a good angle down here. It's even as far as on the right rear cylinder head, right above the exhaust manifold there, it's just covered in power steering fluid. That's probably where it's the worst, is up there, up on the back of the timing cover there. This is too hard to see with a big camera. So next step is definitely gonna be to drop this thing back on the ground, and we are gonna swap this power steering pump out, and then I'm gonna have to spray this thing down with degreaser and pressure wash all of this power steering fluid off the bottom of the car and the top of the engine because it's caked. I should have listened to my gut the first time. That was a bad idea to run that pump, and now I gotta clean up a mess. Let's just do it. Yoink! Holy tits, boys. She blew up for sure. We got power steering fluid all over the place in this thing. That's what was trailing all the way down the freaking timing cover. And then it was splashing all over the bottom of the engine as I was sliding this thing around in the snow. And one thing I kind of want to show, I don't know if you guys can see it. There you go. It's right there. It won't focus, but you see the little blue piece down in there? There is coolant there. And I don't know what that's coming from, to be honest with you. Because this hose up here isn't leaking. I'm curious if that hard pipe is rusted right through underneath and it just has a little pinhole leak. But we're not gonna worry about that for now. I'm just gonna watch my coolant levels. I wanna fix that power steering leak really bad because it is really bad. So here's the old power steering pump. This is what I was talking about, the bracket that's busted. And you guys can see this entire power steering pump is just soaked. I think the front seal blew out of this thing, to be honest with you. And then on this used power steering pump that we got, the bracket is nice and mint. And hopefully the seal on it is mint. This one's not caked in oil and it was pulled off of another WRX. So hopefully that one's good to go. But before we go any further with this, I need to get some degreaser and a pressure washer and pressure wash everything out of this engine bay and underneath the engine because it is caked. So let's get this thing swapped out so we can drive the WRX again, because sliding this thing in the snow is pretty fun. It goes so deep. Start, you're a Honda. I know what's wrong with it. Oh, it does have gas in it.
Come on, baby. Sick. I just time-lapsed through the entire process of me laying under the car, getting soaking wet, pressure washing everything off, degreasing the underside of the car, spraying off all the degreaser on the top of the engine bay, and I go and grab my camera and it decided that it didn't want to time-lapse. The joys of making YouTube videos sometimes. But it is what it is. Engine bay's all cleaned up. That kind of took forever. I pressure washed everything and then blew it all off with an air hose. And I even went underneath while I was at it and I pressure washed all of the grease off from that right front CV boot that was torn before I got the car. Now we got a new axle in there, so that's all good. So now that we got absolutely everything cleaned up and I cleaned the shop floor at the same time, let's get this used, I guess, power steering pump slapped in, get the alternator back on and everything like that. And then let's fill it up with power steering fluid and bleed the power steering system. And hopefully this time she's not pissing everywhere. We got the pop all swapped out now. Everything is completely buttoned up. One thing that is gonna be a little sus, I didn't replace the two crush washers on the high pressure fitting for the power steering pump. I just tightened the shit out of the top bolt. So hopefully that doesn't leak. I got the power steering fluid filled up almost right to the top. I put the cap on for now just because that is gonna bubble up as soon as that pump kicks in. And that pump is gonna whine like crazy on the initial startup. I should have filled a little bit of power steering fluid into the pump before I put it in, but I forgot. So it's gonna whine a little bit. So now let's get this thing fired up. And then we just gotta turn the wheels side to side a whole bunch of times until all the air is bled out of the power steering system. Once I turn it side to side a couple times and the power steering fluid in the reservoir goes down, then I'll take the cap off to make sure all the air is bubbling out of the reservoir. It is whining a little bit, but it seems okay. There's no leaks from that high pressure fitting there, even though I reused the old crush washers. But over torquing that bolt probably helped a little bit. And as you guys can see, the power steering fluid went right down to the proper level. I overfilled it way up to the top, and as it filled the pump, it came right down. So we should be good to go. I'm gonna crank the wheel back and forth a couple more times just to make sure it's 100% bled out. And then honestly, it'll bleed out even more as we drive the car. Okay, good to go. Okay, it is like a couple weeks later and I'm finally back working on the WRX. I've been driving this car for the past 2 weeks and she's broken again, even though we just fixed the power steering pump, I think, in this video. I don't really know where I left off. I'm just kind of picking this video up a couple weeks later. That power steering pump's all good. Been driving it like crazy. Power steering system's fine. But what's not fine is that my axle popped out at 120 kilometers an hour. Like it literally popped right out of my diff, which is not fun. So I'm gonna put a sound clip up right here of what it sounded like at 100 kilometers an hour, and I'm just gonna kind of just post my whole Instagram story that I had going on that morning at 6 a.m. I think on my way to work in the WRX. What blew up in the back of my car? Sick. So since that all happened, right after that, the Civic broke. And I just fixed a couple of the things on the Civic. I can't fix all of them. I gotta get parts still, but I got it good enough that I can drive it back and forth to work till we fix the WRX again. And in the trunk of the Civic, we got parts for the WRX. Back here, we got a brand new right rear axle and a new right rear axle seal. I don't know if the axle seal on this thing is actually screwed, but I got one just in case because the axle did pop out of the diff at 120 kilometers an hour. So let's get the back end of the WRX jacked up, get that right rear wheel taken off. I gotta move all this turbo kit stuff for the Civic over so I actually have room to work on this. And hopefully we can get this axle swapped out. I'm also gonna change the diff fluid because I do have some spare Motul 7590 kicking around from when we changed the gear oil in the STI, even though I don't actually know where I put it. I thought I left it up here. Maybe it's in here. Oh, there's some 7590 hiding back there behind the K&N filter cleaner. 1 liter should be enough for the rear diff. I think the rear diff takes like 0.8 or something like that. So we should be good. Okay, wheel Wheels off on the right side. Let's see how bad this really is down here.
Oh wow. Yeah, that's definitely not supposed to be like that. The left side looks okay though. But this right side, that CV boot is completely ripped. There's grease everywhere. And the axle's not in the diff anymore. But the axle seal's not leaking for some reason, which is a little sus. I don't know why that's happening. Maybe there's not enough gear oil even in there. I don't know.
I think what I'm gonna do here then, oh wow, I didn't realize how rusty that rotor is. Just from sitting in the shop with all the salt from the roads on it. Show you live in Alberta without saying you live in Alberta. That's pretty bad. And these coilovers have been driven on for a little over 2 weeks. And that's how they look. Winter beater status, baby. That's why we bought Racelands and not expensive coilovers. So I think what we can do here to get this axle out is if we just take the 2 bolts off for the coilover, then we should be able to zip that axle nut out, and then we can lay the whole steering knuckle over. We should be able to pull it out. I might have to disconnect a couple control arms, which I really don't want to do because they're going to be rusty and I'm going to break bolts. So let's see if we can get this out by taking the 2 bolts out for the coilover, axle nut, and slider out. So I ended up pulling the diff completely out because the long bolt that connects both those lower toe arms to the outer knuckle is completely seized and I don't feel like snapping bolts today. So we pulled the diff out, and while the diff is out, I'm just going to go ahead and replace the circlips inside of the diff that the axle locks into because this car has a very stupid design. If you look inside of the diff, there is no way you guys are going to be able to see in there, but there's actually a circlip inside the diff there that locks the axle into the side gears of the diff, which on the new axle you guys can see there is a groove right there. That's what locks your axle into the rear diff. And in my situation, since the axle popped out on the highway, I'm gonna safely assume that that circlip is at the end of its life. I'm gonna replace it while I have the diff completely out of the car. It's gonna suck to replace. Hopefully I don't have to rip the whole diff apart and I can shove a screwdriver in there and kind of pop it out. Then I can walk the new one in kind of like a piston ring. But I'm gonna also assume that these are gonna take forever to get from Subaru. So I'm gonna order parts and then we're gonna finish fixing the broken Subaru in the next video because this video is probably long enough already. And we didn't get the stock intake installed in this video. As you guys can see, the cold air intake is still on there and we have not replaced that coolant hose yet. So in the next video, we're gonna get the stock intake swapped out, get that coolant leak fixed, get these circlips replaced on the rear diff, and I actually got more parts. Since this is my current boost gauge setup in the car, just held on by the cup holder, and it's in megapascals instead of PSI, which I don't even know who reads megapascals honestly, because metric is bar. I can't remember what pascals is. Let me know in the comments. You guys can roast me for not knowing that. But I got this new vacuum boost gauge here, good old Princess Auto gauge. If this was you guys in the States, this is equivalent to buying a gauge from Harbor Freight. I also got this little gauge pod mount off Amazon for like 10 bucks and the gauge was about 20 bucks. So I think I'm just gonna mount this right in the center there, right over top of the park lights button because I don't use that anyways. Because I live in Canada. Oh, and we gotta get the other heated seat completely cleaned and swapped out. So we got a lot of work to do still. So with that, that's where I'm gonna end this one. I hope you guys all had a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. I know this video is probably getting posted later in January, but better late than never. Peace out, you guys. Thank you so much for watching. I will catch you in the next one. And then hopefully the next video is the last video, fixing the damn WRX. We can boost the frickin' Civic.